Welcome to Shift, the college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Cassandra with Achievable, and if you're a parent trying to help your student prepare for the ACT, SAT, or CLT without the stress, the sales pressure, or the four-figure price tag, Achievable was built for you. Our courses help students study smarter, stay motivated, and actually retain what they learn, all in a flexible format that fits real family schedules. And you can try Achievable free at achievable.me. And if it's a good fit, use the code podcast to save 10% at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today we have Howard Freedman with us. And Howard, I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, I'd be happy to. My name's Howard Freedman. I'm a financial aid consultant. I work with families and students to assist them in finding the right directions and opportunities to find affordable college solutions to ensure that families get value without breaking the bank.
Yeah, fantastic. And what a great person to chat with today about our topic, which is financial aid horror stories and how to avoid them. So, to start things off, generally speaking, can you just touch on some common mistakes that you see families and students make when they are pursuing financial aid for college?
I think one of the things, think of the title horror stories, and I love making acronyms. And we can take the H for horror and S for stories, and we can substitute it with two words, trying to hide something. And I would say that's really a big mistake. I think there are families that try, knowingly or not, to try to hide something. So that something, whatever that might be, will increase their need for aid. And so doing that, what happens is that schools in turn have formulas and algorithms to pick up on things like that. And I'll give you a really quick one, and then we'll get into more specifics. Let's say a family was filling out a FAFSA form, and they filled it out, and there's a section there that asks for assets of the student and assets of the parents. And what happens is they have, we'll say $50,000 for this example, and they decide to answer the question, no, they don't have any assets. But when the school receives the financial aid information and does a verification, which they do against a tax return, they see an amount under interest. So it's not possible to get interest if you don't have assets. And that kind of opens up a whole new thought process in which a family is trying to be dishonest about what they have, when in fact they don't equate what's on their tax return with their assets. I am not saying this happens all the time. Some people, have small assets that don't get interest, and it could be a little bit of spending money and all that, and there are oversights. But when it comes to big money that generates interest or dividends, be honest about it, because a lot of those assets may not be very liquid, or they may be earmarked for other things. So the best thing to do is confront what you have, what the intent is in terms of spending that money, and be honest, because assets do not count as much as income.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. To go down that train of thought, when it comes to filling out the FAFSA forms, what other mistakes do you see families make that could really be detrimental to them in the long run?
Well, one thing when we look at divorce stories, there's a lot of different mistakes. I'll give you some that I think are biggies, okay, and I'll tell you a little story that goes with it. Okay, so the first mistake, and this happened many years ago, is that a student and their family worked with me, and they needed help completing the FAFSA. The parent had average income maybe 70,000. They seemed on the surface to be worthy of some need-based aid. But as I looked at their tax return, again, to pick up on what I said earlier, there was $10,000 in interest. Okay, so this one's interesting. So I said, your income's good, but where did this interest come from? I said, oh, my mother, this is the parent's mother, was going to an assisted living facility. And she thought by taking her assets and giving it to her only son, that those assets would not be included in determining how much it would cost to go to this assisted living. So the son, being the good son, said, okay, mom, yeah, just give it to me. I'll hold it. When you need money, I'll give it to you. But what happened was, again, there was a lot of interest. And I looked at it and said, where did this interest come from? He said, oh, my mother gave me the money to hold for her. But it's her money. And I said, well, according to your tax return, that's your money. She said, no, it couldn't be my money. I said, yes, because it's under your social security number and it's considered your assets. So what happened was he lost out on aid because he helped mom try to bury her money, but he buried himself because he took that money, didn't put it in a little box under his bed. He invested it. And because of that's what was reported. There's no label on the money that said it's mom's money used for going to an assisted living facility. So that's an example of not looking at the big picture, not looking at the fact that he was being a good mom. He wasn't really trying to be deceitful, but he just really didn't look at the big picture. And if I hadn't helped him to understand that, he wouldn't have gotten at least something. And then what does he tell his mother? You could have the money back. They're going to kick me out of the home because I lied. So that's a good example of one of many horror stories in terms of where does this money go? Who controls it?
I think too, then moving down the pipeline, when families receive financial aid packages, what are some common misconceptions or red flags that they should be looking for?
I think in looking at financial aid packages, I recommend to set up a spreadsheet. And the purpose of that is to do several simple things. One, I think you have to look first at the cost of attendance, the total cost of attendance of a school. And that includes both direct costs to the school and indirect costs, such as trips home and computers, etc. I think you have to look at the costs. Okay, then you go through and you look at the aid you get from the federal government, which is usually $5,500 the first year. Then you deduct the merit-based or gift aid. That's the scholarship money. Okay. And then you might deduct work studies. Okay, so we get to the point that we have gross costs, we have free money or low cost loans, and then we get a different unmet need number. Now, again, that number is something many families don't do, is basically negotiable. So any aid a family gets can be negotiated, could be appealed. You don't have to accept it. But as you go down the list, one mistake is you just can't look at the size of the financial aid award because you have to look at it in context of what is it the actual cost of attending the college. So ultimately, as you whittle down, you compare the colleges, you look for things where which college is going to cost me the least in terms of merit based, in terms of the net price of college. And I'm going to jump back. The other thing is colleges have net price calculators. That's number two. that you can figure out the cost. Three, you can go on the website and see what the average amount of aid dispersed is and how it is dispersed. Look at the net cost of college, okay? So what is the net cost? What is the out-of-pocket cost of college? I think the most important thing to really look at is before this whole process, before it all, you should figure out how much money can be spent and who should be responsible. And you have to look beyond the money, you have to look at the quality of the education. You have to look at the statistics in terms of what's the retention rate, what kind of jobs are available upon graduation, uh, what is the acceptance rate. So you're really blending quality and quantity with the amount of aid. And then, bottom line, you have to ask, is this really worth it? Is it really worth it? Is it really worth it if you wanted to be, for example, a social worker, to go to a private school that's $80,000 when you can go to state school or other types of institutions that will yield, that will cost less and yield a great return rather than indebting yourself in a lot of debt that's not going to result in a fair payback. That's what you have to look at. But don't, I would say number one, don't just look at the award you get because there's much more to it. You got to look at, again, as I said earlier, in my first example, you have to look at the big picture.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And when looking at schools and options, obviously you're looking at the financials of it, but like you said, what is the ROI of that investment, right? And really understanding how, depending on what you're looking to do and what kind of degree you're looking to get, how is that going to be beneficial in the long term?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think that's really important to be looking at ahead of really even applying for financial aid. Like, you should really understand what everything looks like. And like you said, using spreadsheets, I think, is a great tool, and really getting organized with every potential decision you could make and how that might affect you financially. So, I guess then, what are like some good common questions that families should be asking financial aid offices that could help them maybe avoid some of these risks?
I think you have to look at two things to answer your question. One, questions to ask financial aid offices, but also questions to ask admissions. Okay. The reason I say that is that um, I think it's important before anything to do your research. So that's the first thing. If you know the answer to a question, if it's out there, um, you might ask a question to say, according to the research, I've noticed that the net price of college at your institution is, but I only got the net cost for us is 35,000, which is average people. Can you tell us basically what is your basis for determining how much or how you go through the formula of calculating need-based aid? Now, I'm jumping over to merit-based aid because that's something that people often overlook. So merit-based aid is based on merit. So essentially, it's how intelligent is a student, how much does the school really want that student, or want that major, or want that sex in terms of a particular major. Uh, how much is that student going to bring to the school? What is the value? So we're talking now about value, that right now you're asking a financial aid office to give you money, and the question is, why should they? Why do they have to give you money?
Hmm.
They don't owe it to you. And I think the real
Right.
reason is you have to be a good salesperson and sell yourself that this student is going to be a really good student for the school. they're going to be a good alumnus. They're the type of model student that the college is willing to go out and recruit. The student has good grades, they're well rounded. And so this whole process of asking questions is a buy and sell in terms of, you know, both the student determining whether or not or how badly they want to go to that school. And then the school in turn needs to determine how much they're willing to pay for it. But it's a combination. And I think you have to look at uh, two other terminologies that your listeners should be aware of. One is need blind and need aware. So need blind offers awards without regard to the family's financial position. Cassandra, you're just a great student. Would love to have you. The need aware is they take that into account along with awarding merit aid. So essentially, if a student comes from a really wealthy family, they may not, in fact, want to award it. The other thing that's very current and around a lot of schools, but schools are getting into the realm of letting students go to the school for free. There aren't a lot of schools, but I would suggest that your listeners check them out because these are schools that have money. Usually they're looking for families that earn less than 200,000. They're really willing to buy students in a way by giving them free tuition. I think that's a new trend. I'm not saying all the colleges do it. And the other trend is that colleges are benefiting also by giving out more endowments and money from a tax basis. So they want to do it, but they have to be somewhat selective. They can't send everybody to college for free, but I think there's some pressures in terms of free college, giving out more endowments from a tax perspective. And most of all, I think it's important to question things and to go back and not accept the first offer. That's really important.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The other thing I wanted to ask was, do you ever see families that maybe make the mistake of not even applying for financial aid, just assuming they won't qualify or it's not worth it for them? And is there a situation where maybe that is the case where don't even waste your time?
Yeah, I have failed. It's a really good question. I think there's a lot of information out there, especially from the Federal Department of Education, that talks about doing the FAFSA. Okay? So here's what happens that they feel if they do a FAFSA and they earn too much money, they're not going to get anything. The least you can get by doing a FAFSA is a $5,500 federal loan. Now, what's the big deal? First of all, it's the only loan that a student can get without a cosigner, okay? And it gives them an opportunity to start building their credit. So that's good. Secondly, when I wrote my book, I kind of try to be a little bit witty, and I made two acronyms for the words yes and no. The word yes, my acronym is you expect success. So no matter what you do. And no stood for new opportunities. Now, schools that have called, even though they may be need blind, a lot of times they want in their filing system some indication that the student has an interest in some type of aid, and they may be considered for merit aid or something else. But if they don't bother doing anything, you can't win the lottery without a ticket. It's impossible. But you never know with this FAFSA form may bring. Now, there's another form also called a profile, and that one gets into a lot more detail, But I have a quick horror story that I think is worth mentioning. It happened several years ago. I had a client who were both in the real estate business. The husband and wife were in real estate. And this was the year before the big crash, so to speak, 2008. And they made collectively a couple $100,000. So they came in, we talked about it, said, we're not going to even bother applying because we earn too much money. And I said to him, why don't you tell me more about your situation? Because the FAFSA was based on prior year income. So let's just say maybe in this example, the prior year income was 2003. We'll make that up. What happened is the market imploded and they couldn't sell homes. So the following year, they didn't have any income, and all that they use for income is to put it on their credit card. So they had a lot of credit card debt, So if they submitted the FAFSA and say, or if they didn't submit the FAFSA and say, I don't really care, what would happen? They'd get nothing. But when the school looked at it and said, this family really doesn't have anything because they're living on credit card, now they got all this credit card debt. It's not the same as it was the prior year. And it turned out they got a lot of aid. So you need to kind of look at the fact that you got to look at your whole life. You have to look at your situation. You have to look at how your money is dispersed and spent. You have to look at job security. You have to look at family well-being and health. There's a lot of factors that are behind the money that's foolish not to apply. It doesn't, if you do the form yourself, the mistake people make is they do the form and then they walk away. They walk away and say do the form and they hope for the best. But they don't take the time after the form is submitted to follow up with the school and follow up about admissions and follow up about how much they could get, because every school varies in terms of how much they disperse in merit aid. Maybe there's a benefactor that wants somebody with certain characteristics. Okay, you can get money. So it's foolish not to do the fast. It's foolish to say you're not going to get anything because you'll always get something. And you have to look at it in a positive way. And you also have to look at people do have money. I have a lot of people have money that don't manage it well. No offense, no at all. But they make a lot of money and they spend it and they don't have any liquidity. So that's part of the story. If you had this situation where a person earned 200,000, but they had a child that had special needs, or they had a family member living with them, or the roof blew off because of a tornado or hurricane. That's not going to be on the FAFSA. That's when you have to take action and see what you can get.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Is there anything that you think we missed that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
I think the most important thing on all my horror stories is that, as I started out, is just don't think you can outsmart anybody. Don't think negatively. Spend the time ahead. There should be no surprises. You can tell in advance what the net cost of going to college is. I think with that, you have to spend time with the student and talk about it before the student says, I was advised to apply for such and such school. And several months later, they get accepted. And the child is really happy, but then the parents are really distraught because they know they can't afford it. And I think to avoid that, I think you have to talk about this ahead of time. See, in reality, look at the things that are relevant: the parent's age, the job situation, the economy, investments. Are there other children in the family? Um, And you want the child to really justify why they want to go to college, what they want to do, how much debt they're willing to assume, and how serious are they about this. Because, and this may be another episode, that there are other things besides college that students can pursue, okay, if in fact they're not ready or the cost is too prohibitive. So I think the most important thing is put your emotions to one side, look at the numbers, because I think this is truly a business and a family decision that is not just based on where a student wants to go or the stress and the pressure to attend, but it's based on making the best investment so a family can continue living a normal lifestyle without debt, pressure, or guilt. That's what matters.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of things that I'd share. I think one thing is my website, www.financialaidconsulting.com. I mention it because the website consists of many of my articles, um, a newsroom, podcasts, and just overall things people should know and how to get in touch with me. That's that I think is number one. Number two is I have my book, Making College Happen. The book itself, and I have to say this, when I wrote it was before certain legislative changes occurred. So the book is very much relevant, except the explanations about some of the FAFSA and other forms, those have changed. But they'll always change. But I've gotten extremely good reviews about it because it's just very simple. It takes you through all these steps, including the horror stories, and we talk about many things in honesty. And I highly recommend it. It's not to me a big money maker. I'm not John Grisham or Stephen King, sorry, but I'm wise Howard Freedman that wants to share what I know and what I can do to help other people. Just to be smart and ahead of the curve and do the things that they feel are right and honest and sincere. And that's why I wrote it. And that's why I very much encourage you to get it. It's on Amazon.com. And then maybe the third thing to wrap it all up is that no matter what, don't be discouraged. There's over 5,000 schools in this country. That includes regular schools, colleges, trade schools, the military. There's a school for everybody. Everybody. So believe in yourself, believe in your ability. Find a school that fulfills the needs of the student and the family. And be proud of your decision. You don't owe your decision to anybody. You owe it to yourself and your family. And I'd be delighted if you were able to do that because that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Cassandra from Achievable with Howard Freedman. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT, SAT, and CLT courses at achievable.me. And you can use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.